Hi, everyone. This is Eli Lippman, Move LA Director of Programming and Development, coming to you live for another program. As people kind of file in, I'll be your moderator. I just want to briefly thank all of our sponsors, but I want to especially thank Arup and Mass Electric, who helped to make our programming both accessible today, but support our work on public transit, affordable housing, climate change, and clean air. So thank you. So today, let's just jump into this. We've got some fantastic guests today. Everyone has been talking about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or as some know it, the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act. It's a big deal. It's about $1.2 trillion package. Half of it's going to transportation, mass transit, bicycle, pedestrian programs, electric buses, passenger rail. We've got plenty of other investments in there, and I know our guest, Representative Gomez, will speak about that. Internet, power upgrades, energy upgrades, capping oil and gas wells, so much there. But there are concerns, right? The Georgetown Climate Center just released a report about the possible effects of the bill on investments and whether they'll result in higher or lower emissions. They're going to depend on whether we expand freeways and promote more single passenger vehicle use, or we're going to have cleaner alternatives such as buses, trains, and electric vehicles. You can tell we have a perspective here. So we have California's transportation. Oh, my sister's calling me. Hope she's okay. She'll have to wait. Our transportation sector currently in California accounts for about 50% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions, when you include refinery emissions, as well as 80% of nitrous oxide pollution and 90% of diesel particulate pollution, more than anywhere else in the United States. And according to the state's own report on our transit goals versus our achievements, it found that, quote, there is a gap between the climate-friendly state vision for transportation and the reality that investments at the state and regional level continue to emphasize auto mobility. So we've got some big opportunities. We've got some new flexibility, but we have some serious challenges. And that's what we're going to talk about today with federal leaders, our state transportation agency, honored to have them here, who have been engaging stakeholders, including us around the state, on funding decisions, advocates from equity, transit, business, and labor worlds. Really, Move LA's like core group. And so it's going to be a great panel. Let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to Dave from Mass Electric, who is going to introduce our honored speaker.
Thanks, Eli. Morning, everybody. My name is Dave Luchter, and I'm a project executive with Mass Electric Construction Company. Mass Electric is one of the most experienced rail transit design builders in North America, and we specialize in the key systems that power and control the operations of our passenger and freight railroads around the country. We've completed over 600 projects for more than 60 authorities. We deliver innovative, safe, reliable, world-class transit systems around Southern California and across North America. And we're very happy to be here presenting this event with Move LA and Arup. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity this morning to introduce U.S. Representative Jimmy Gomez. He voted to pass this very important bipartisan infrastructure law that we're talking about here today, believing that it'll be a transformational law for this country, delivering on the president's promise of cleaner, more resilient, and more equitable future for working families in LA and across the country. He represents the 34th Congressional District, one of the most diverse and culturally rich in the country. He is the vice chair of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform and sits on the powerful Ways and Means Committee, as well as serving as the assistant whip for the House Democratic Caucus. Thank you for being here, and thank you so much for being supportive of our important infrastructure in this country and in the city.
Thank you so much, Dave. First, let me thank everyone for being here today and to discuss this important issue when it comes to the bipartisan infrastructure bill and what it means to California. When I got elected in 2017, or sworn in July of 2017, one of the first public events I held was a infrastructure roundtable for Infrastructure Week at Union Station. This was with Speaker Pelosi, Mayor Garcetti, and others. And it was something that we had talked about. It was something that we believed that we could get done in a bipartisan manner. But during the Trump years, it proved pretty elusive because they weren't willing to make the compromises or the decisions that were necessary to bring people together to pass an infrastructure bill. They chose instead a tax cut. So once we got into office, the president, Joe Biden, they had a choice to move forward a couple of bills. I would have preferred that these bills would have been kept intact as one budget reconciliation, but it was decided to be broken apart into infrastructure as well as Build Back Better. In the end, that proved to work out just fine. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed the Senate with 67 votes. This is everybody from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin and everybody else in between, and Republicans. So this was something that had a lot of momentum. But as you guys saw it play out, is that these bills were supposed to move together. Build Back Better, infrastructure. And that's what people were trying to ensure that this would occur. In the end, you saw the ugliness and the divisiveness of the fight to move these bills in tandem. But I want to make sure that you guys understand it was never in doubt that the BIF would be passed and signed into law. When something passes out of the Senate with 67 votes in a bipartisan nature, there's no doubt that it's going to get passed out of the House. There's no doubt that eventually it's going to get signed. Make it, a few weeks or a few months compared to a few years or decades from before that there was a failure in action. So when we actually had the chance to move this forward, we did, but we also were able to position Build Back Better in a place that would pass the House to ensure that it would go to the Senate. The Senate hasn't kept up their end of the bargain when it comes to Build Back Better. And that's why you're seeing this questioning of, is it going to be enough, this bill alone, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and combat climate change? That is, I think, a debate worth having, because these bills were supposed to build off each other. We had the green infrastructure, the charging stations in the infrastructure bill, but then you had the tax credits for electric vehicles, used electric vehicles, weatherization, and the transitioning to a more renewable grid in the other bill. So these bills work together. And it's not saying that the investment from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is not going to be massive. It is huge. And that's why I always, my colleagues in the building trades here in California never doubted what I could do, never doubted where my commitment would be to pass both bills. At the federal level, they like to see everything as black and white. You're either with them or you're against them. You're either progressive or moderate. You're either with us or you're against us, and that's how it is at the federal level. But it's so one-dimensional. It actually pains me, because then it takes off a lot of options off the table that could deliver not only the BIF but also Build Back Better. So I'm glad that we did end up passing the BIF in the end, and we passed Build Back Better out of the House. And it was great to be at the bill signing. It was something that was people were proud of, because this was a long time coming. There's going to be massive investments to combat climate change, bridge the digital divide, and prepare us for the challenges of the future. But one of the things that we've made sure to emphasize, as well as the White House, is the idea of equity. How do we ensure that these investments do not bypass low-income communities and communities of color, as infrastructure dollars have so often in the past? How do we make it so that we uplift communities that have been often left behind? How do we make sure that it's not just shovel-ready projects, but shovel-worthy projects? One of the lessons they learned from the Obama years is that when you focus on shovel-ready projects, are they faster? Yes. But it's oftentimes that the major cities, the major states, the more affluent communities that have projects that are ready to go, that just need an infusion of cash. It's oftentimes the lower income communities, the ones that have been disadvantaged or left behind, that don't have that preparation, that need that extra help. That's something that we learned in the water bond when I helped negotiate the water bond in 2014. The fact that we needed not money just to the construction of projects, but also the maintenance of projects that we get online. So and also the design phase of those projects. So it is something that we're doing a little differently. And I do believe that a lot of the new grants that are out there, we're going to be competitive in California. Some people forget, in 2016, I was actually the co-chair of the conference committee on infrastructure here in California, the one that was supposed to get ready for the infrastructure bill that we have ended up passing in 2017. I was busy running for Congress at that time. So California, we're ready to take these dollars. That's why you've seen a lot of our projects ready to go. That's why you've seen a lot of investment come to California, especially here in LA. It's amazing that I have a lot of these major construction projects. We have the 6th Street Viaduct. That is, at first it was 80% federal dollars, I think even 90%, but it's kind of shrunk as the amount of money going into that project has increased. I have the regional connector, I have the Union Station, I have a lot of these major projects that are focused in downtown. Also, we were able to fight to get more money to modernize the electrical grid in the bill, expand clean public transportation, provide safe drinking water, to remove lead, increase broadband, and improve climate resilience. But we got to not forget that a lot of the stuff that's in this bill gets us halfway or 2/3 of the way, or or even 3/4 of the way to a more equitable and cleaner future. But it's the local funding, it's the state funding. Good example, when it comes to the lead pipes, it only takes care of the lead pipes at the city line. And in order to kind of do the connector, the state is looking at how do we invest in a lot and make up for that cost to to remove the lead pipes from the house to the city line. So California is way ahead of other states. And that's because we also have a bigger budget than most states. So we're working hard to make sure that we get our fair share. I'm happy to say that one of the first things that Alex Padilla and I were working together was to ensure that we got money for the LA River. We're getting the first 28 million of 172 million that goes to certain projects along the LA River to restore the habitat, and also to make sure that we're cleaning up the air and the water. So it is just the beginning. A lot of this is how do you fight those fights to ensure that LA isn't punished because we've taken steps, and California isn't punished for taking steps to raise our own revenue in order to complete these projects. How do we make sure that we get those resources? I think with your advocacy, the advocacy from the locals, from Metro, we're going to be doing even better. So we have to work together. I look forward to making sure that we keep getting the resources we need, but at the same time that we focus on equity and we do not leave communities like the ones I represent behind. With that, I know you guys are going to have a great panel who know more about this than I do. So I want to just say thank you for all the support you've given me and my office over the years. With that, I yield back, Eli.
Thank you, Jimmy, and you're a great leader. If you don't mind, I'd love if we could ask a question. I have one from Beth Osborne from Transportation America, one of our panelists, and Zahira Man from here in LA. If you can give us just a few minutes of your time, and I'll ask them to ask both of them to ask the questions one after the other, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving me a chance to ask the question. I wanted to point out that the infrastructure bill still maintains the 1982 based 80-20 split between roads and transit. We hear a lot about the record increase in transit, but we don't really talk about the record increase in road funding that went with it. Considering the studies that Eli pointed out at the beginning from the Georgetown Climate Center and the New York Times about how using the infrastructure bill according to the status quo could worsen our emissions, what can we do as climate leaders? How do we use funding from old programs in new ways to prevent the infrastructure bill from doubling down on the worst of transportation infrastructure approaches from the last several decades?
Yeah, no, great question. And 80-20 was actually I know it's the status quo, but some Republicans wanted to get even rid of the 20% set aside. They believed infrastructure was solely roads and bridges. They didn't believe that it should go to charging stations. They didn't believe it should go to a variety of things. So although it seems to maintain the status quo, sometimes treading water is better than losing, going under. And that's what I think that we were, honestly, a lot of us were fearful of. And we did push for more money to go to transit. Part of it is kind of looking at projects that are, how can we use the new technology and how do we look at projects in a different light? A good example is water projects, the money that goes to water. Water projects in California, moving water from one place of the state to other is 20%, uses 20%, it consumes 20% of the electricity used in the state of California. So if we can make some dent in that consumption of energy, we can maybe also reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, a lot of it is left into the regulations. It's not detailed at the federal level. It's not detailed like we do in California. So a lot of the regulations that are put forward through the executive branch can have a big impact on where that money goes and what kind of projects are built out. It is broad line items, and that gives us a lot of potential to influence what projects are funded. And that's what I think that the emphasis is on the executive side. Biden had tasked all his departments with 3 different main objectives. 1 was equity, 2 was combating climate change, and 3 was building up our manufacturing base here in the United States. So you're going to start seeing how do we influence the rulemaking at the federal level to impact what kind of projects are funded and how that impacts the emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions throughout the country. So it's not done. We just have to know how to engage in that process.
Excellent. I'm being told by your staff that you have to jump off.
Okay.
So Zahira, I know Zahira has a quick question. If you
Go for
have
it.
just 30 seconds, we'll get it in.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Representative Gomez, for the discussion. We greatly appreciate your leadership and your support. For the infrastructure bill, can you speak a bit more to what the resources mean for federal promise zones, which for the audience's benefit are high poverty communities in select urban, tribal, and rural communities throughout the United States? In addition to the promise zones, what does it mean for other low-income communities? How will the investments overall affect poverty?
Great question. When it comes to the promise zones, I have to take a look on how that's going to be impacted. I know that when it came to just a lot of federal dollars during the Trump era, they didn't even want to. A good example, they were prohibiting any project that used federal dollars from doing local hiring provisions. That was something that the Metro mentioned as a big problem, because that's a lot of the requirements at the state level and the county level for local dollars is that they have to have a local hire component to it. So there was conflict. Part of it is also looking at, I think they're trying to engage what projects will be funded. These projects still need to be selected. Communities still need to be selected. So a good example, there is I think either $1 billion or $5 billion regarding reuniting communities. Getting rid of highways and trying to reunite communities that have been divided in the past. Those haven't been selected at all. So how do we kind of make sure that communities like Boyle Heights or the East Side that have been devastated by highways maybe can compete for those dollars? A lot of that hasn't been determined yet, and a lot of it is still being rolled out. And because we're on a continuing resolution, a lot of it, we don't know really how much is going to be rolled out. A great example is the LA River money that we got. We asked for $172 million for some projects. We ended up getting the first tranche of 28 million. And that's because we're on a continuing resolution. So a lot of it is still fighting for projects. Once we, they're not picked yet, they're not selected yet, and we have to be competitive. But we're going to emphasize that to the Biden administration to continue looking at communities that have been disproportionately impacted by pollution, by poverty, by income, by health, and focus on that. And they're doing that. It just depends on how much emphasis they put on what component. So, but they are doing that more than I would say any other administration in history. So, but with your help, we can advocate for more resources to get targeted into different areas.
Thank you so much, Representative, for your time. We'll let you jump off and head to your next appointment. But that was really great and powerful. And we're glad we have your leadership in Congress. So
thank you. All right. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to hand it over now to our next speaker. We have Chad Edison. He's our Chief Deputy Secretary for Rail and Transit for the California State Transportation Agency, CalSTA. So I know it's like a soup of acronyms in Sacramento. But he's been working on rail and transit for more than 2 decades. He worked for Amtrak. He worked for one of our other sponsors, actually, AECOM, as well. He's worked for the Federal Railroad Administration, and he's been in this position since 2014, and appointed as Deputy Secretary from 2019. So, Chad, thank you so much for joining us. Something that will come up too is you were kind of the lead author on CAPTI, which is the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure here in the state. So I'll let you speak for a little bit, and then we have a question from one of our panelists, Anne Marie, for you.
Great, thank you so much, and I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Thanks for that introduction, and I'm thankful also for Representative Gomez's comments. I agree that we in California are both ready and well positioned for pursuing federal funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. A lot of hard work went into passing that, and we really appreciate it here in California. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides tremendous opportunity for California to implement transportation investments over the next decade that will address some of our most critical needs, and to do so in a manner that is cleaner, more environmentally sustainable, provides for jobs with good wages, and allows us to more significantly address the inequitable negative impacts of our past and current transportation system. I'll make just a few opening remarks and then look forward to the discussion and dialogue that follows. Much of the federal bill is really well aligned with California's current policies and programs, most of which have substantial existing and ongoing resources in our state and local budgets. In many cases, are proposed to receive substantial new infusions of money through general fund augmentations that are in the governor's budget proposal for the 2022-2023 budget. Since the federal money will be released over the next 5 years and spent over a longer time than that, the opportunity to leverage our state and local funds is very significant. Some of these funds are delivered to California on a formula basis, but others we need to compete for. In some cases, such as for intercity rail and major projects funding, very significant funds have been advance appropriated. But in both those programs and many others, such as those for federal transit, Congress authorized additional funding that will still need to be appropriated in the annual budget bills. We need to join together to advocate for Congress to appropriate to those authorized levels. With the formula funds, if the programs deliver higher funding levels as authorized, we have substantial opportunity to rethink what scope we want to add to our most critical projects. There's great flexibility to make sure that our roadway projects include best-in-class active transportation elements or address transit priority and other projects to speed travel for public transportation users. California has done well in recent years in developing tools and programs to better choose and design such projects, and now we have additional funding that can help us do more. Also, putting federal funding for charging infrastructure or for clean fuels to work in the right way and combining it with our tremendous state resources for both infrastructure and vehicles is a great opportunity to meet our goals for fully zero emission vehicle operations throughout the state, good for jobs as well as our air. Competitive funding available in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law creates an even greater opportunity, but also a unique challenge. Significant money is in programs that have not traditionally received that much federal investment, such as improving corridors with intercity trains, investing in freight rail and ports, and investing in mega projects. The governor's budget has proposed transportation and supply chain investments that would make significant additional state money available for such efforts. And we need that additional resource to be competitive. But we also need rapid coordination among local and state agencies on our highest priority projects, so we can receive a solid share of the federal program funding each year for the next 5 fiscal years. And I believe we have a greater chance in the early years to do that as other states are getting ready to develop their projects. I think California could be in the lead on many of these. With local agencies in Southern California much more used to pursuing transit capital project funding from the federal government, and much of the expertise in intercity rail and freight rail corridor investments present in Sacramento and tied to the state rail plan, we need to rapidly engage in an expansion of our discussion of the projects primed for advancement. In many cases, local entities may want to consider the flexibility allowed within their local tax measures and within their abilities to amend programmed resources to prioritize investments in rail, goods movement, and mega project advancement that would match with the federal resources and combine with state funding, make our federal applications more successful. We have the policies and programs in place to be successful in winning funding, and these will hasten our ability to achieve our major policy goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality, especially in disadvantaged communities, and also to deliver a multimodal zero-emission transportation future with both climate, health, and workforce benefits. There are great opportunities available to us to move towards a zero-emission rail and trucking future on the freight side, and the state already has a well-thought-through approach and strong initial funding to make our intercity passenger rail services fully zero-emission by 2035. Let's make sure we get federal funds from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to accelerate our efforts. There's much more I could say that would provide more detail on these topics we've addressed so far, but I'll save that for the discussion to come. And thank you for the opportunity to provide these brief opening remarks.
Awesome, and thank you so much. I mean, the work that, and I have to give a shout out to CalSTA, who put together, 12 or maybe even 13 now different work groups on the infrastructure bill. And they stood these up, and I emailed a bunch of colleagues, it's sort of in December when everybody's brain was shutting down. And I emailed a bunch of colleagues statewide and I said, you guys have to get on these committees. And they're like, why? What's the point? I said, if we don't work as advocates to change the regulations, change the funding formulas, change the thinking, and push what we would like to see, now we're going to be fighting bad funding decisions for the next 5 years. And so you're going to have to spend 20 hours sitting on a number of these working group calls, but that is 20 hours well spent, because you may spend 100 hours fighting a bad project that you don't like in your community. Yeah. So that resonated with them.
I think we're approaching 300 people participating in those work groups in sub-working groups. So it's really quite an elaborate and in many, kind of many sector discussion, but it's very worthwhile in getting feedback across the state and trying to get to our prioritization ahead of the money being available to apply for.
Well, that's thank you. And then we'll continue to participate in that. I'm going to ask a quick question from Mike Bullock, one of in the chat, and then I will ask Anne Marie to ask a question as well. But Mike's got a question. And I agree. The draft, the CAPTI, the Climate Action Plan, the draft favored replacing the state gas tax with a means-based road use charge. What was the thinking behind it not being in the final report? Is there opportunities to think about that in the future?
Well, we're already at the state level working on a road user charge program that includes collecting real money and doing a demonstration of that. And so I believe that we're waiting for some of the conclusions from that to look at what we recommend for the future coming out of that effort.
Okay. Well, we'll look to that. I know that LA Metro, and maybe Heather will talk about this a little bit later, has just done a whole study that they just released the initial results on congestion pricing. And there's a large pot of funding potential there, but some equity concerns as well. So I think there are ways that the state and the local can work together. Anne Marie, do you want to jump in?
Sure, absolutely. This is Anne Marie Odie. I'm the communications director for the Los Angeles and Orange County's Building and Construction Trades Council. And it's great to be here. And we are the workforce. And as Zahira had brought up before, as we're all concerned about, as our congressman also addressed, there are plenty of workforce issues around this. In fact, I do see a side question from participant Gus Malkoon about participation of minority businesses such as Weeby, Meeby, et cetera. That's more usually for contractors, but of course, as you know, we also address to a great extent diversity in our union workforce. So Chad, throwing it to you, we worked so closely, of course, with the state on so many different projects, and to be able to look straight into the eyes, you know, via Zoom, you can stare at people and nobody knows that you're doing it. And I'm staring and going, this guy has a lot to do with our projects. This is great. Tell us how we can continue partnering to make sure that these good middle-class construction careers are open to all the diverse communities of our great state. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the workforce, both the workforce development and having strong workforce participation from the trades and from, you know, the other organizations that are involved in getting these projects built. It's a critical part of our transportation package. It's a critical part of the governor's budget. We continue to, you know, look for the types of projects that do this. In our Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, we highlight, you know, the benefits that can be delivered as projects are delivered by our local agencies. But there's a partnership here between, you know, what regional and local project sponsors do and what the state can incentivize and include here. So I think this is really continues to be both a joint effort between the state and the local organizations that deliver many of the projects, and also a case for, you know, direct state investment in the workforce development and in supporting the projects with high road jobs. So this is very much a part of, you know, not just transportation agency policy, but also, you know, our work with other entities at the state level.
Great, thank you, Chad. And I did want to add along the lines of what came up again with the congressman, that when we can't, for various legal reasons, have specifically local hire targeting certain zip codes simply based on saying, if you live here, we can prioritize you for hiring. But what we can do, of course, is use one of a dozen criteria that we developed with LA County Metro, such as things as being an emancipated former foster youth, being a single parent, having been involved with the justice system, living even in a zip code with above average poverty or below average employment. And honestly, you know, it's a commentary on our times that there are most zip codes will allow you in some way or another will apply to those criteria. The simple reason that on federal level, of course, as you know, we can't have strict local hire sometimes is that technically if it's federal money, somebody in Maryland, you know, pays the same taxes and has the same right to be considered for the project. But again, both on the state and federal and local level, we have so many criteria to bring people into our building trades that it is really, really wide open for those interested. Chad, I know that the state also follows a lot of that.
Awesome, and we love to hear that. And I know that the LA Building Trades and Anne-Marie, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, is really focused on how we, particularly in communities like South LA, as well, how we improve workforce development around these infrastructure projects. Awesome, Chad, you're able to stick around, right? Fantastic. So we may have some more questions for you and from the panel, but I want to kind of give an opportunity for our other great panelists to kind of jump in and talk about, you know, I'm going to start with Beth, just because Beth is our wonderful partner, and we worked with Beth. She was fantastic, helping to really write the legislation, figure out where to push in certain directions, who needed a call, who needed a meeting, getting letters put together, policy advice, and then even just local, like, hey, can we use this money for this purpose, which was so helpful. So I just want to thank Beth, first of all, as the Director of Transportation for America, for being a partner with this big group that we had. It was a national transit justice group. I'm going to put the link in in the chat with Alliance for Just Society and our partner and one of our sponsors, Transit Center. So she's really an expert in this stuff, and she had a great question earlier, but I'd love your thoughts and responses to kind of what Representative Gomez and Chad said. So go ahead.
Absolutely. First off, thanks for having me here today. I want to put some of this in context because this is a huge bill with all kinds of different things in it that can be quite confusing. We've tried to create a portal that I'm going to put in the chat of all of our explainers. We're trying to bring it together to demystify this absolutely gigantic bill that is going to be quite the challenge for folks in the administration to implement. Just for a couple little points of perspective, a little more than half of the infrastructure bill was dedicated to the surface transportation programs, with $432 billion for highways, about $100 billion for transit, and about $100 billion for rail. So like I mentioned before, it does maintain the 80-20 split between highways and transit. I will say that really very few Republicans were interested in reducing or getting rid of transit funding. We actually had a vote on that in a Republican House back in 2009, and they overwhelmingly defeated an effort to take transit out of the program. There are so many transit districts in Republican areas, including rural areas, that would be quite self-defeating. Things have changed a lot. But it does go to show when the White House in particular gets behind something, what a big impact it has. And it got way behind the rail program, and in one fell swoop created a rail program that is the same size as the transit program, something that's existed for decades. And I think if they would have put some emphasis behind increasing the transit portion, we would have gotten a similar result. Overall, the thing to know about the program is transportation agencies have new money and tons of flexibility. They can use that money to achieve great change, to invest in local economies, improve safety, lower emissions, reduce inequities, but they also have the discretion not to. And a significant number of agencies have said that they don't share those priorities quite recently. But it's not necessarily that they don't share the priorities. It's that it's natural to build what you've always built until you're kind of pushed in another direction. And while this infrastructure bill gives permission to go in another direction, it doesn't really give anybody a push. So just again, perspective wise, traditionally what we do if we identify a problem is we create a new little bitty program to fix it. And we leave the bulk of the funding untouched. So 75% of the highway dollars go to these big, very flexible programs called the National Highway Performance Program and the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program to the states. Immense flexibility in that, though, the agencies that were built as highway programs or highway agencies tend to build highways with them. So that's 75% of the funding. To reduce emissions, we have about 7% of the funding, 2% for carbon specifically. There's 6% for savings. There's about 5 or 6% for those competitive grant programs, which you should definitely pay attention to. But it's 5 or 6% compared to 75% that is going to the big traditional programs. So I think a big part of what we need to look at is how are we going to use the discretion within those very big programs to build different things than we have in the past. There's a really great example out of Utah right now where they're looking at improvements to I-15 north of Salt Lake City, and they're creating that as a reconnecting communities program. So they don't have to, they're not going to the reconnecting communities pot of funding, which is $1 billion out of the $432 billion for transformation. They're using their regular money to look at ways to reconnect the communities over I-15. There's nothing prohibiting us for doing that, but that is going to take strong leadership from California and from the governor. That the feds can choose a very aggressive approach to implementation, and we will be pushing for that, including new roadway designs that's really focused on safety for people walking, rolling, biking, and designing roads to really support efficient transit. They can require transportation agencies to do what Caltrans is already doing in terms of looking at induced demand, something that really no other department in the country is doing as effectively as they are. The governor could also require roadway designs to support safety, particularly for people traveling outside of a car. He could choose to flex a much greater amount of highway dollars to transit and change the 80-20 split within the state. He could measure the level, the extent to which the transportation system connects people to jobs and essential services, especially for lower income people and non-drivers. And he could take a page out of Utah's book, and all of the highway projects could look very explicitly as part of the fundamental purpose of the project to reconnect people on either side of that highway. So that's going to be up to local advocates, local leaders, state officials to really think about how we change the way that we use kind of a status quo program to get different results, both in terms of the federal program, but also in terms of the state program itself. I will share one more thing and then I'll shut up, which is, you know, whether you're talking about resilience or safety or climate, we've dug ourselves into a hole. So it's really not helpful to spend the bulk of the money in a traditional way in a little pot of money to improve things. If we do that, we're going to continue to dig that hole deeper, while just kind of powdering a little bit of money on top, as opposed to fundamentally changing the focus of the program. We had a little fun with this, and we created a nice little cartoon that demonstrates, I've shared that as well, exactly how that will not lift us out of the hole. And I think that you've got a lot of talent in the state, a lot of great leadership, but it's going to take self-policing and really changing the state's product rather than relying anything in the federal law, because it really doesn't deliver a different product. It allows for it, but it doesn't deliver it.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. And I'm getting messages from people I won't say who they are, but they think you're cool. So and the stuff that you are doing is awesome. But I think your point is well taken. I mean, we talk in California how we are just so progressive on this stuff, you know, and we see this with the city of LA right now. And I have to shout out to one of my colleagues here in LA who's got this campaign called Healthy Streets LA, where the city of LA passed a very progressive mobility plan that was going to have 2,600 or 3,200 miles of bicycle lanes throughout the city. And it got all these national awards. And how many have they built? Like less than 100 miles in the last several years. And this plan has been in place for several years. So what have they done? They have now they're collecting signatures, but they want to put in front of voters in the city of LA that basically requires the city to do it. And it's kind of what you're saying is like the governor kind of just has to be a leader and say, you know what, we're requiring you to do this because, you know, frankly, you know, this this assembly report that came out from Assemblyman Friedman, she authorized it, basically said that, yeah, our actual goals, we're not living up to them in our spending. So there's plenty out there. Thank you, Bryn. I think you just, Bryn Lindbrad, our colleague from Climate Resolve, just posted the op-ed from the LA Times about Healthy Streets LA. So let's, thank you, Beth. I'm gonna ask Heather now to jump in from the LA Metro, from LA Metro. She's the Executive Officer of Sustainability Policy, as well as Vice Chair of the Board of Directors at the Metropolitan Water District. Busy person. So I'm actually on the Sustainability Council for Metro, full disclosure there. So we work really closely with Heather, and she's been a great ally. So Heather, please talk a little bit about what Metro is thinking about all this.
Sure, and thank you, Eli, for bringing everyone together, and thank you to Move LA for all the work that you do to advocate LA on behalf of LA Metro. We really appreciate you guys. And I think this is such an important topic. I mean, this bill has, a historic amount of funding. It's not perfect, and it's not enough, but it is progress. And, we're at LA Metro, we believe that we have all the right components in place to take advantage of it. We obviously have already the biggest infrastructure program in the country. We are out digging every day, building. And so for us, this is first and foremost an opportunity to complete the promises that we've made, the commitments that we've made to communities across LA County. Some of the projects like the East San Fernando Valley Light Rail project, the West Santa Ana branch projects that are addressing equity in terms of our ability to provide affordable mobility options, zero emission mobility options for as many people as possible. And, we also are a huge job creator. I see Anne Marie here. At LA Metro, we have a very vigorous project labor agreement program. 40% of the participation of our construction workers are required to be residents of economically disadvantaged areas. We have a 20% apprenticeship requirement. We have a 10% participation of disadvantaged workers. So I know one of the things that the administration wanted to accomplish is the creation of jobs, and not just any jobs, but good jobs with a pathway to unionization, jobs with a pathway to full benefits. So we're very proud of what we do in that respect. I am playing a role, Eli, in Metro. I was asked to help convene our internal working group to get as much money as we can out of this bill. And one of the big challenges that we're going to have, and I'm sure a lot of agencies will have this, but especially us, because there is so much opportunity, is capacity. And a lot of the money is divided up into smaller competitive grant programs. I think Beth mentioned, the Reconnecting Communities program. It's pretty small. RAISE, there's for us, right? They're not small for a lot of other agencies, but for LA Metro, where we're dealing with these billion-dollar projects, some of the pots of funds are on, and so for us to have the staff to apply for those grants, but also to manage them when we get them, is just an issue that we are confronting. Obviously, there are huge opportunities, like I said, to build out our transit projects, and also the opportunity for funding the implementation of our 2030 goals for the conversion of our bus program to zero emission is very important. It's expensive. The charging is expensive. The buses are expensive, and we need definitely to get a lot of funds out of this federal bill in order to be able to meet those goals. We want to make sure as well that we're not punished at LA Metro for being early adopters. We currently use 100% RNG to fuel our non-electric buses. So the Low-No Bus program, the bus and bus facilities grants will be important opportunities for us. There's obviously a lot that's just, specific to transportation, but there are other areas as well, including housing. We have talked with the administration about the fact that they're interested in doing some really interesting financing opportunities for affordable housing. We obviously have our transit-oriented communities program. We do work with developers to ensure that we are maximizing our real estate assets for the development of affordable housing. There are grants around resilience, having a chance to work with Zaira and Slate Z on climate resilient communities. There are opportunities around energy beyond just bus electrification. I think this idea of how can all agencies participate in making sure that we can get to our clean grid goals by using our facilities to generate renewable energy, to store And then broadband, obviously, the better our broadband, the better it is for folks who want to telework and not have to drive. And that's another way for us to reduce emission. I know there's a lot of talk around highways. Obviously, Eli, you and I have talked, as you know, my office is undertaking a project that looks at the climate emissions that are being generated by the various types of transportation projects and initiatives that we undertake. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important issue, and I know LA Metro takes it very seriously. Our board obviously passed a motion last year to modernize our highway program, to bring flexibility to those sales tax dollars. And obviously SB 743, someone asked about Colorado in the chat. SB 743 is going to require us to mitigate VMT emissions from future highway expansion projects. And VMT mitigation is no joke. It is hard, it's expensive. So that is going to be something that, we're going to be grappling with. So those are my comments, and I look forward to discussing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. And I'm already starting to see an interesting topic for conversation. So I want to give everyone a little chance to address the issues, but we'll discuss kind of in the conversation about the sort of tension of like expanding highways doesn't reduce congestion. However, it does improve, or it's needed for goods movement and the business community and getting our goods to market and stuff like that, because most of our goods are moved by trucks, for better or for worse. So this is, I'm saying this to create a little bit of a discussion later. So I'm excited for that. But I do want to talk about the business angle. And we have here from Arup, Catherine Perez, who's been just a great advocate for equity and has had many roles, in fact, including working with my colleague Gloria Owen. She also teaches at USC. Fight on, and was co-founder of Estelano Lazar Perez Advisors that works on many transit projects, but has been working for Arup for many years. So where does the business community and the planning and engineering community come into this?
Yeah, Eli, first of all, thank you so much. I want to say thank you to all the other panelists, but also to Congressman Gomez for coming and kind of giving us a perspective of what's happening in Washington. And certainly his comments actually made me shift a little bit of my own thoughts about what I wanted to share. So thank you, Eli, and Arup is very excited to support the organization and the efforts of Move LA. So I have been with Arup after doing many different things over my professional life. I happen to be the LA Cities leader as well as the zero emissions leader. So I get an opportunity to crosswalk the issues between kind of local jurisdictions and also this transition that we're trying to make into electrification and in many cases actually hydrogen. But I was asked to kind of step back a little bit from the private perspective and a company that is global. I just want to take a step back and let you know what we're thinking about and then kind of bring that back to Los Angeles if I can. Arup is an international firm, but we have made a commitment to the UN SDG goals, so the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And what we mean by that is very real. And we made that statement at the recent COP26 conference in Glasgow. And we were very prominent there, as was the city of Los Angeles. And we were very excited to help the city in promoting the Green New Deal and other things that have been going on in the region. But Arup made two significant commitments toward decarbonization. And we can talk about things, but it really does matter that you start doing things. And I think that was some of the comments that we've got to start doing things. So the first thing that we've done, which was announced last October, was we are completing whole life cycle carbon assessments for all of our building projects, including new and retrofit projects. So what we're doing is we're adopting these assessments, which gives us an understanding of what the kind of global building sector market is doing, and then how we're going to get to a 50% carbon emissions reduction by 2030. It is a very big step for an organization that does big projects, big building projects, large infrastructure projects. So we're going through that process right now. The second thing is we're focusing our energy sector entirely on low carbon energy solutions. So our existing portfolio of wind, solar, and hydrogen, we are moving very clearly into a very different chapter in our organization. And starting actually in April of this year, we will not pursue any new energy projects that support the extraction, refinement, or transportation of hydrocarbon-based fuel, which includes gasoline and jet fuel. And these are the efforts that we're making at a global scale, but they're in our offices in California, which include LA, San Francisco, and Oakland. That means something. So what does that look like? If we're turning to LA, we've really targeted our sustainability efforts around the housing crisis, mobility equity, entrepreneurship, which is a fundamental consideration about the kind of regeneration of our economy post-COVID, but also resiliency. So to Heather's point about like, you know, or I think Beth, you were saying we can't just kind of scoop this stuff in on the top and feel good about it. We actually have to think about it in an integrated way. So I've been working with our advisory team at alternative delivery methods that look at decarbonization and sustainability goals right at the beginning and the onset of project conception. But we're also, because we know that we can no longer do things as if it'll naturally occur, right? We have to have intentional outcomes. So these are the measurable metrics, you know, whether it's embodied carbon or other kinds of GHG measurements, we know that we need to shift and we need to do things differently. And those two things I want to mention, we have worked closely with the NRDC in Los Angeles to complete a study looking at the decarbonization of our affordable housing stock, existing affordable housing stock, and what kind of considerations we need to make when we're talking about this transition. Because as we know, these things are expensive. These processes that we're about to go through are expensive. And we need to make sure that as we're thinking about our social infrastructure, I don't want to think just about mobility and maybe water, electricity. I want to think about the places that we live and the communities that we actually enjoy. So when we did this study just about a year ago, looking at what it's going to take in terms of LA's existing building stock of affordable housing product and how we're going to get those units into electrification, as well as not just in their internal systems, but looking at our mobility options as an added feature. Because that is another thing that we can't do, is we can't move forward if we're not including all the different parts of our communities. And we're very committed to doing that. And so listening to Congressman Gomez talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that is to me super exciting, because he mentioned something that we have been looking at. And I know the Congress for New Urbanism is looking at this issue too, about reconnecting communities through decommissioning of freeways. And while freeways, and I've had my debates with a number of my friends and colleagues who are attending about freeways, we want to understand what freeways and their impact on our communities and our overall GHG emissions and carbon footprint is, and it's significant. So understanding what those overall costs include, what they do to our cities, our neighborhoods, they have disproportionate impacts. So some of the things that ERIP is doing right now through our own internal investment is looking at this reconnecting communities. And as I think Congressman Gomez said, it's a small piece, but it's going to be the state budgets that are really going to leverage these dollars and make huge impacts on neighborhoods that have been scarred and deeply wounded for generations by these decisions previously. So the investments that are coming from the federal government stacked with the state and local support, if we don't change how we do what we do going forward, we're going to miss a huge opportunity if we fail to take advantage of these new and one-time, I think, unique resources. So we need to make a permanent pivot toward a sustainable and equitable direction. And I know that ERIP, we are very focused on that. And I just want to say something, because we all know that there's a parade happening in downtown Los Angeles, and we saw that there's a lot of attention on LA, on California, and we have an upcoming Summit of the Americas. We've got FIFA 2026 and of course the Olympics, and those present to me additional opportunities to mobilize ourselves and actually continue to be a leader, not just in the US, but globally. So I just wanted to add that kind of perspective of kind of where are we at on a global scale, but then what are we doing at a local scale as well. So thank you very much, Eli.
Awesome, that's perfect. And it really is going to take, and this is why this panel is so exciting and important, it really is going to take transit advocates, the business community, the labor community, agencies and those in the bureaucracy and equity advocates working together to get this right and do this so it isn't in a way that you know, just entrenches the mistakes of the past. And so that was a really good sort of transition when you were talking about the Reconnecting Communities program, because I actually co-chair the South LA Transit Work Group for Slate Z. And that's something that we've been bringing up, is the funding opportunities and how we ensure that those dollars, and that really, you know, to Zahira's question earlier, to Representative Gomez, how do we ensure that those dollars get not only are directed to better programs than they have been in the past, but are targeted to areas that have not received the investment that they have. So Zahira, can you talk a little bit about the work of Slate Z and how this interacts with what we've been talking with so far?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have this discussion today. So I want to provide a little bit more context in terms of what Slate Z is. So Slate Z stands for the South Los Angeles Transit Empowerment Zone. We're a backbone entity that facilitates and manages the efforts of the South Los Angeles Promise Zone, which is one of 22 promise zones in select urban, rural, and tribal communities throughout the country. Each promise zone is a place-based collective impact effort that serves as a space for innovation and collaboration, developing solutions that can be expanded to other parts of the region, state, nation, and as Catherine just mentioned, really the world. We're working with around 100 partners, including Move LA and Metro, focusing on revitalizing South LA by moving residents to economic opportunity. Infrastructure, especially transit infrastructure, is really important to us and is really important to our effort. At Slate Z, that is how we began. It was really thinking about transit infrastructure and what that meant for economic activity. And our geography is really bounded by transit lines. It's how we define ourselves in so many ways. With our work, we're focused on a number of different issues where transit starts to impact all of these other areas. So we know that it impacts jobs, and it's one of the areas we're focused on, but it also has an impact in some of our efforts around education, public safety, small business, and entrepreneurship. It becomes anchoring in so many ways, and that's how we've designed our effort. And in so many ways, our work really lives at this intersection between economic revitalization and environmental sustainability. That is how we are defined, and that's how we've grown together as a collective of 100 partners. Through our work, we're really focusing on how to fundamentally address poverty within South Los Angeles. And with opportunities like the infrastructure bill, most of our focus is on jobs. How do we build strong work-based learning opportunities, workforce development that happens, and career pathways that help to ensure that residents in South LA can take full advantage of these opportunities and these dollars that become available? And how can we ensure that they benefit not only low-income communities, but communities, again, like South LA and like the Slate Z area that have historically also been inundated with pollutants. So we have a number of pollution-related concerns and issues where we also have the problems of unsafe roadways that have led to pedestrian harm, all of these different elements that the bill is designed to really help to address. How do we ensure that those resources actually come to the communities that need them, like the community of South LA? One of our main pieces, and as Eli mentioned with the transit work group and the work that he is leading there, has been to have discussions with our partners in terms of how we can ensure that the resources come into communities like South LA. What we've seen has been there are so many different funding opportunities that are out there, and the numbers end up being these really high numbers because we're talking about a national level of investment. And even when we talk about state levels of investment, ensuring that those dollars then become more than just numbers on a page, but we actually see real life on the ground investments in community takes a bit of work. Because we need to be able to draw the dollars within the community, be competitive for them, and then see projects that are responsive to the community's needs. And so all of those different elements require work on various levels, from the work with the communities on the ground all the way to the point of how do we actually get those dollars. And as we do all of our work, we really think about the authentic voice of communities, because there are lots of different projects that may work theoretically, but what we found in working with so many community members is that we have to make them practical for the community, and they need to be right-sized and focused for a community like South LA. So something that may work in West Hollywood or North Hollywood, or even in Boyle Heights may not necessarily work for South LA, which means that whenever we're looking for resources and trying to draw funding into a community, we need to actually ask the residents and have conversations with them in order to ensure that that's going to be the right project. And that all of that work takes a fair amount of time to engage in community engagement and efforts around it. And so as we look at these funding opportunities, like the infrastructure bill, we're also looking at how we balance the need to act quickly in order to ensure the resources come in, but then also act in a really deliberate way that engages all of the community members so that when the investments are made, they're investments that actually speak to the needs of the community. The one last thing I'll say on this, Eli, because I know we want to get to other parts of the discussion, is that although our area is bounded by transit lines and transit is really important to our work, within that are roadways, and some of them are the most active roadways in our country. And so when we think about all of these investments, then also ensuring that we have really safe roadways and that pedestrians can not only just traverse streets, but that they can access transit requires us to have safer roadways. Otherwise, we won't even see the full utilization of our transit infrastructure unless we also have safe roadways. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this discussion.
No, and thank you so much for being here. And I just love the work that we do at Slate Z, and I'm really excited about the Rail to Rail project that we've been working with LA Metro on. And I wanted to shout out, while I'm mentioning that, I wanted to give a shout out to the past CTC, California Transportation Commission chair, still on the CTC, Hillary Norton, who has joined us and giving plenty of kudos and shout outs in the chat. So we appreciate that. And I will tee up, we're just confirming details at the end of March. We'll be doing a program that she will be moderating, where we're going to be talking about some of the cool projects that are happening kind of around the metro investments to make the system more sustainable, more accessible, things like urban gondolas potentially, or things like a downtown rail car, streetcar. So look for that. That should be an interesting conversation too. So lots of fun stuff coming up for Move LA. And I wanted to also tee up as well, and I'll post in the chat. We are, as Anne Marie said earlier, working on this United to House LA effort. And as Zahira was talking about earlier, this really is about how do we increase job opportunities for folks, particularly in low-income communities, and in South LA, but in East LA and other communities as well. How do we ensure that these are quality jobs, not just sort of, minimum wage jobs, but they're family sustaining jobs that you can build some equity in the community. And that's really what the work of the building trades is. So I will hand it over to Anne Marie. I know she's been posting a lot in the chat too and has lots to say. Yeah, go ahead.
I really have two minds here. I'm here for jobs. I'm here for people who do jobs. We're here for construction. We have a huge stake as the representatives of 150,000 skilled and trained workers who work in Los Angeles County and Orange County. People, for the most part, who did not come from a college-educated background, many challenges in life, and who are now earning really good incomes, working really hard, active as union members, proud of what they do, and continuing to be active and giving back to their communities. So I feel like I can sit here and say all of that, and then I can sit here and read the comments where people say, we don't want to build this and we don't want to build that. And I'm torn because, like all of you, of course, who cannot be an environmentalist at this point? Who can close their eyes or their nose, to the problems that are happening in our society? On the other hand, we are here for the work, and by that definition, in a way, we represent the status quo. And at a time of great change, like right now, representing the status quo is a very difficult place to be. So I'm going to actually, with the time that we have left, it's only 16 minutes, instead of going on more about that, you'll excuse me. Yes, I am in the building trades, yet I have a cat who lives with me, so again, no stereotypes. that I'd love to throw it out, especially to the people who have been active both on the panel and in our comments about these issues of let's not build any more roads. I would rather hear from you than tell you why or why not. We always need a union workforce. I'll be honest again and tell you that one of the most exciting things that I'm seeing is the move to unionize Starbucks. I mean, we're seeing things that a couple of years ago we thought we would never see. We have President Biden signing a mandate for project labor agreements on federally funded projects of $35 million and above. And while again, thanks to people like you and all of our allies, we've got loads of great project labor agreements here in the city, county, and state of California, across the country, that's really meaningful. So again, it would be hard for me to say, let's not have that road built in Kansas, which will finally be built under a project labor agreement, a union project labor agreement, because we don't want to build any more roads. I welcome dialogue. I want to hear from all of you. So I'm going to leave it at that and have
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think that's great. And maybe, I know Chad's still here, and Chad and I had a great conversation last week a little bit about this of like, yeah, well, 80% of the money is still for roads. We're still going to be fixing and building roads, but Chad was saying, well, maybe we can do it with Fix It First, and there are ways to do it in a way that is more sustainable and provides more opportunities for non-car usage. So Chad, maybe I guess I'm handing it over to you, but I'd love to also hear the perspective from others.
Yeah, I'd love to have other people add to this. I'm going to actually just give one example that I think is illuminating. We recently were taking data that we had because some of the systems in the LA basin report GTFS real-time data. And we took the Long Beach transit performance on Pacific Coast Highway from Cal State Long Beach to the west. It's a state road that's going to have investment in it over time to maintain it and improve it. And one of the things that you see in that data is very clear places where the buses just slow way down. A roundabout close to the campus, it takes 8 minutes to go a quarter mile for the average bus. And so, when we start sharing that kind of information with the engineers at Caltrans who are working on, potential projects for that road, what if we give them that challenge of like making sure that bus in key locations really gets through the intersections faster? What if it really, we give it transit priority, we have queue jumping, we do other kinds of investments with the signals. That doesn't necessarily take expanding the road, but it takes managing the road in a way that gives all those transit riders that are, very many of them on many buses in that corridor, a better trip. And so that's just an example of some of the stuff we need to do. We have to deal with the last mile. We can't just, invest in the fixed guideway investments. Those are important. They provide, efficient movement of lots of people. But we also have to, look at what we can do within our existing investments. A lot of that goes along with the maintenance and operations dollars that we're already spending. And with more money in the federal package, I think we have the chance to really add some of this scope in that previously didn't have as much money to invest in it.
Thank you, Chad. Beth, I know you posted a link and I may have missed it, but I know there was a good link in response to Anne-Marie's kind of question. So Beth, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we actually did a study. I seem to be working with folks in Utah a lot these days, with the University of Utah, that analyzed spending and found that we actually create more jobs per dollar on repair projects than on new capacity. Look, if you are fearful that some environmental lawyer friends of yours don't have work, a new capacity project is fabulous for them because they need to do the right-of-way acquisition, and an extraordinary amount of money goes into that, but it doesn't create hard hat jobs. We can create I think we should separate the notion of the status quo being about workers and something new, leaving them behind. We created a lot of jobs building highways through Black and brown neighborhoods. We can create a lot of jobs reconnecting those neighborhoods or taking some of those highways down, reconstructing bridges that are weight restricted, focusing on repairing what we have before we build new things that we can't afford to maintain. There's just a good way to create jobs and to spend taxpayer dollars, and a way that just creates future problems, which I don't believe that anybody, particularly unionized workers, are seeking. I hate the notion that the way we're going to create jobs is to do damage. We can create jobs and fix damage.
That's great. That's great. Anyone else want to jump in on this?
I will also just build on what Beth is saying. You know, one of the challenges I think we're trying to understand is how we understand and heal from this phase that we've been through. And part of that healing is understanding how we actually kind of redress these issues that happened in the past. And I don't believe that expanding freeways is part of that, because I think actually we're going to be shifting how we think about mobility. We already are on that transition process. And so I think the pandemic has accelerated and obviously exposed some of the gaps between those that have access to resources and those that don't. But we're going to address those things. And I think we're creative and innovative enough to understand that there were folks that were absolutely damaged. And we haven't, and through this pandemic, we have a lot of health, a lot of recovery, because we can be talking about that you know, working from home and all, you know, the children who are school having to deal with these issues, being educated from home. But there's a lot of communities where there's going to be a lot of issues that with kind of reintegrating them and getting them back into back in sync. And what I mean by that is I'm talking to educators and talking about the youth, and in particular, the mental health and wellness. And so I'm trying to say, we got to think about our larger community, and we need to think about how we're going to really heal on many levels. So to me, it's a commitment to the future. It's also a commitment to really redressing some of the issues that we haven't been taking we need to take a closer look at.
Well, Anne Marie, the other day we were in a presentation, you were talking about the apprenticeship programs and how you've really shifted, you know, where you were seeing, you were seeing the apprentices coming in didn't match sort of the state population, particularly in sort of vulnerable communities, but also Black and brown communities. But now that started to shift. You had some great statistics. Do you still have those handy, or?
What Eli's talking about in particular is the City of LA Public Works Department Project Labor Agreement, which keeps really, really specific background and demographic data on all the hires that have come through the Project Labor Agreement that again has a targeted local hire. So we're able to see the backgrounds that people are coming from, what they're bringing to our workforce. We do see overrepresentation. I mean, if you just look at it in these pure demographic terms, which is not the only way to look at things, overrepresentation actually of Latino workers in proportion to their population, slight underrepresentation of African-American workers, about average representation of white workers, and actually a slight overrepresentation on Asian and Pacific Islander. Again, these are sort of very general over categories, and there are many other ways to look at people besides those, but that gives us some basic data on the workforce that we're talking about. And I would say overall, actually, it's quite representative of the population of the City of LA in this case, and of the County of Los Angeles. And so again, it goes back for me to where do those jobs go when these issues happen? And a couple of other issues that I'd like to bring up, for example, are the issue of offshore wind power and where people stand on that one. And when Catherine, for example, is talking about no longer working, you know, with certain types of fuel, what's the picture on hydrogen, for example, as a future fuel source?
And I would just point out real quick, I think, Heather, you were on the Board of Public Works when that PLA was passed. So everything comes full circle on these things. So
that's true, and I definitely want to agree with Beth. I mean, I think the whole idea of actually trying to address climate change, it should be done in a way that creates good jobs and supports our local communities and our local economies. So I don't see a conflict where it comes to climate action and job creation.
And I'll just add, by the way, sorry, I had a lighting mishap. It's the hassles of just things falling around me. But the transition, and thank you, Anne-Marie, for the issue about hydrogen. And there's a lot of discussion already about how we're going to move through electrification to hydrogen and what that looks like. It's another, everything is expensive, but we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get there in a day. It's going to take us time. But the exciting part is in California, I think we're actually beginning to have some meaningful discussions. And certainly in the cities that I'm working in, the city of Long Beach is like, let's talk hydrogen right now. And I'm thrilled to have the interest and kind of political support, frankly, to say, let's go do that and let's have those conversations. And so there's going to be some early adopters. And I think that those early adopters are going to be figuring stuff out while everyone else begins to make that process. So, but there are, beyond hydrogen, there's going to be a lot of new things and new technologies. And certainly from where I sit, I see that happening fairly quickly.
Well, that's really great to know. And I know we're running out of time, but Denny Zana, my colleague, and I have been thinking about, because there is $9.5 billion in this infrastructure bill for the development of hydrogen. And they just came out with an RFI yesterday, I think, or 2 days ago, regarding hydrogen hubs. And there's very strong interest from a bunch of different sectors, the labor community, the sustainability community, the ports, transportation planners, to really, how do we develop green hydrogen here for our goods movement system? Because it could be a real opportunity for jobs. It could be a real opportunity for cleaning up our heavy industries. All of them are very heavy and polluting. Our airport, our ports. It's a whole other conversation, and we are planning. I think Denny and I were already planning to talk about a public conversation that we could have on that, because that's a significant amount of funding, and we want to see that come to Southern California. I want to pass it over to Zahira, who wanted to talk about this balance between jobs and environmental issues.
Thank you, Eli. I think it's such a good point, and thank you so much for raising it also, Heather, in terms of, that there is no conflict between addressing climate change and jobs. They're really consistent with each other, and we're looking at so many jobs that will also help to address, some of the climate concerns and as we move forward. And there was a comment earlier in terms of, at this point, everyone should be an environmentalist. And I think that in many ways, so many of us are, because what we're seeing is the greening of the economy. The piece that when we work with community members, we're also talking about the ethos and the philosophies around environmental issues without calling it necessarily an environmental issues or calling people necessarily environmentalists, because it really just becomes a state of being for everyone kind of moving into the future, because this is what our society requires. This is where we have now seen alignment between not only what the regulations provide, it's also what we need as an entire world. And then we also have market forces that are behind it, and we have the funding behind it. And so this is the direction that we're all moving in, and it's just a reorientation of everyone. And we can call ourselves different things as we move forward. Some of us are going to be climate justice advocates. Some of us are still going to be focused on environmental justice issues. Some of us are going to be, our typical green environmentalists, but we all have the same values. And we know that there's a deep consistency between having those values and the jobs that we're seeing in the future. And it's not only the way that we're looking at our work with adults, it's also in terms of the work that we're doing with youth, youth development programs, the educational efforts that we're doing with youth. It's all becoming incorporated so that we're all speaking the same language, even if we categorize ourselves differently. Thank you, Eli.
Oh, awesome. And thank you all. So we're just about to end. I just wanted to give a quick plug to everyone out there to visit our website, movela.org. Help us do the big stuff. Make a donation up here. You can also sign up for future events or follow us on social media. Also check out united2housela.com.
Yes.
This is our affordable housing effort. partnership with the building trades. We'll probably do some fun programs on that in the near future as well. You can endorse the effort and see how to help. And a quick plug, because this is so related, we want you to go to Climate Resolve. I'll post in the link, or maybe Bryn can help me, and tell the Burbank City leadership to take action for climate justice. We need a dedicated bus rapid transit from North Hollywood to Pasadena. It needs to be a dedicated right of way. And so we're really pushing for Burbank and other leaders, Glendale, City of LA and Pasadena, but particularly Burbank, to say yes to that. So we need your activism on stuff like that. And so those are my quick plugs. Again, thank you to all of our incredible panelists, experts, speakers. Thank you for this hour and a half or a little bit more of your time. 12:30 exactly. I think we can end the program on that note. Thank you so much.